So this is Management 301 as we head into week 5 and the activity that we need to cover for this week. I'm Bernard Gibson, your instructor here at Brandman. So let's get into the meat of what we want to talk about in regard to this particular topic. And the first piece I really want to emphasize is to really look at managing teams. And I think this is very important. We have to understand that and I think we do, as individuals, we have characteristics, but the team also has certain characteristics. The better and the more we can understand what those characteristics are, the more likely we are to be able to then help manage that team. So we're looking at things like how the team has norms established, its cohesiveness. What size are we dealing with? When you look at the effective teams today, size is actually not dictated by number of people, but also by depth of knowledge and education and base that the team collectively has. What stages are the team in the way of their development? And then one of the big ones that becomes difficult for people to understand is there's team conflict. And no matter how well your team runs or operates or is managed, there are certain components of conflict there, some healthy, some not particularly as healthy. The type of team we have, I think, is just as important too. So do we have a team that's forward thinking? Is there a team that's in transition? Is it a team that's taken on a load and previous baggage in our organization, and they're trying to change that direction? So how do we figure out what the type of team is that we operate within and manage? Sometimes we can do a self-assessment, not just an individual assessment, but we can also look at a self-assessment of the team. And then that allows us to go into what decisions we need to make about the team's management and direction. And there is some good and some bad with teams. You'll have advantages for your organization or your particular teams, and you'll have disadvantages. How are you managing those? And what is it that, what tools, I should say, and resources are you using in order to manage those good and bad team characteristics? And then I think that allows us to go into effectiveness. So how effective is our team? And again, as a manager, we can't judge or gauge how effective we are without looking at how effective our team has been able to pull things together. Do they work together well? Are they in a position where they're establishing goals and priorities? Is there training that's collectively done? And this, I think, is for the 21st century, I think this is a component that's missing a lot of times, because we're still prone to send individuals into training, but are we sending teams into training? And think about it for a second. If I send my team in, they're more likely to be able to learn not only collectively and collaborate, but then they have an immediate sense of responsibility to the rest of the team because they've all been through the same thing together. The military has done this quite well in certain groups throughout the last probably 10 or 15 decades. And then we also have to, in our teams, when we look at this collective picture that's in front of you, understand that there is compensation and recognition or rewards that we've looked at to make sure they're applicable. I would tell you that as we look forward in trying to understand rewards and recognition, they are going to change. So in other words, they shouldn't be static mechanisms. They should be fluctuating mechanisms, much like our goals and objectives are when we're going through the process of development. The second piece of this discussion really starts to get into then, if we're able to pull this team together or to get this team running well, how did we get that jump start? So one of the things we have to do well in human resources or HR is we have to manage those resources extremely well. This is difficult to do because there is a huge planning element. So not so much as what positions do we need filled, but more how are we going to fill positions for the future, and looking at staffing, looking at recruiting, looking at all of these elements that are necessary for our team success moving forward. when we talk about planning, the planning has to be effective. So there have to be funds, there have to be processes and systems. We have to look at the employment laws, adverse impact of employment and discrimination, sexual harassment, resource information systems, demand and supply, forecasting. So you can see all of a sudden this looks very formidable as a task to bring on. Now, aside from all of that, there are companies that are starting to look at managing their human resources and saying that, well, maybe some of that responsibility should be placed more on managers, and they are trimming down their HR staffs. So, not to say that that's wrong, but it's dangerous in how you execute it, or how you, as we've talked about in this particular piece, how you plan that thought process. So we are looking for qualified workers, and that's the first piece. They have to be qualified. So we have to get away from this notion that we like someone or we think someone might be a fit. We've got to have criteria that helps us understand what fit means, and are these people truly qualified to do what we want to do. At the same time, once we are finding these qualified people, we have to be just as committed to develop them. And I think this is one of our first drop-off points when looking for qualified workers and employees, in that we are committed maybe to find them, but we're not as committed to develop them and then, of course, keep them. Because there are these episodes or incidents or activities that flare up, and people then become disenchanted with people that they've spent a tremendous amount of time, effort, and money in bringing on board, and they decide that it's much more cost effective to cut them loose and bring on the next person. And of course, in the short run, it may be, but in the long run, this becomes problematic because we have compensation issues, we have employee benefits, there's separation and termination of people, downsizing, retirement. All of these costs and all of these qualifications within a worker spectrum put pressure on the organization, and thus create a difficult environment for us to be able to then manage. And that's the key component. It gets difficult to manage that when we've got people moving in and out of our organization and we can't stabilize it. Aside from the fact that other employees look at this carefully and it concerns them to see this type of behavior going on. So finding qualified workers in the recruiting element and making sure that we've got internal and external recruiting components is important. Developing qualified workers through a comprehensive training and evaluating performance appraisal system is important, and then keeping them. So there's a commitment here, and that's part of why we necessarily don't see a lot of that with a lot of organizations today. We don't know how to sustain that model effectively moving forward. All right, so you've got a little bit of work to do in regard to this lesson and introduction to what we're looking at. And so I'd like for you to send me a one-paragraph summary, and it could be, a paragraph of at least, 3 to 6 or 7 sentences. So a nice beefy paragraph, and explain to me why this lesson is important. And what elements you can use your present tense or your present job, or you can use something in past tense as to why you think it's significant, and get that to me no later than Sunday at 5 o'clock. That would be excellent, and also it lets me know that you've been through this particular lesson and you understand the concepts of it. If you have questions, feel free to contact me as you always do via email, or you can give me a call. That's not a problem at all. So we typically ask ourselves, what did we learn today? And so think about it for a second. What were you able to pick up? So acknowledge receipt of that. You can put it in your paragraph if you like, but the main thing I want is the email to me in regard to this lesson. But make sure you send me a email acknowledgement separately, and then send your summary of this particular lesson as well. Think about what you're able to pick up in the time that we've spent together in regard to this particular lesson. Here is your thought for the day. The best manager is the one who has sense enough to pick good people, develop them, show some self-restraint, and allowing them to then do their job.